Devil May Cry Season 2 was refreshingly better than its debut season, and I mean that in the best way possible. While we got all the Dante versus Vergil action that we'd been looking forward to, the best part was the showmaker's decision to give multiple big bad villains for our heroes to deal with. I mean, introducing Jester as a mole within King Mundus' inner circle was quite the fan service that I appreciate, but setting him up as one of the big villains for the next season was flawless. Even if Demon King Mundus might reign as the bigger villain next season, I just know that Jester will prove to be a bigger pain in the ass for both Lady Mary Arkham and the Sons of Sparda. This means there is really no better time than now to discuss the core of Jester's character in the overarching franchise and understand what will happen to his character in the coming season. So, without waiting another moment, let's get right to it. Who is Jester in the Netflix show? If you've watched both seasons of Devil May Cry, you already know that before we knew him as Jester, the show introduced him as John Arkham, who was initially a college professor obsessed with researching the alternate world. John had a wife named Kalina Ann and a little girl named Mary Ann Arkham. His life was pretty good until one day, while returning back home after a movie, John and his family were attacked by a demon. At that moment, John froze up in shock, but luckily his wife came through to protect their daughter. It certainly helped that the demon was smashed by a passing train before it could harm them. Later, when John tried to report their demon encounter to the police, nobody believed him and instead laughed at him for being deluded. As time passed, John simply couldn't let go of what he'd witnessed. The incident not only confirmed that his research into demons was real, but it also left him haunted by his own helplessness. He became completely consumed by his obsession and chose to abandon his job by shutting himself away in his study for days at a time. The more he spiraled into his work, the more distant he grew from Kalina and Mary. In fact, John's obsession slowly destroyed him as the man grew painfully thin, his health deteriorated, and he even began losing his hair. Eventually, he managed to acquire an arm of a demon and started conducting twisted experiments with it. By that point, he was far beyond reason. One night, Kalina finally confronted him and begged him to stop, but John refused to listen. Their argument escalated until Mary walked into the room. As Kalina tried to calm her frightened daughter, John took the opportunity to inject himself with demon blood. The transformation was immediate and horrifying. He was driven mad, and in the chaos, he attacked Kalina, killing her in front of Mary before grotesquely devouring her body. Mary tried to fight back, but she was no match for him. However, during the struggle, the building caught fire, and while Mary managed to escape, John was seemingly consumed by the flame. But the end of Season 2 revealed that John actually survived. Apparently, sometime after killing his wife and traumatizing his daughter, he resurfaced and aligned himself with Arius, eventually taking on the persona of Jester. From there, he began secretly working as a spy for the Ouroboros, feeding information about the underworld while pretending to be a court jester within the court of Mundus. It was Jester who led William Baines to Mary so he could train her to become his best general in the coming war against Hell. Jester became privy to all the vital information that came from both sides of the playing field and used them to his own benefit. Lady found out about her father after recovering the laptop Baines had previously used to show her the footage of Arius meeting with John Arkham. After she watched an extended version of the recording, Lady realized that John was not only alive, but had now transformed into Jester. So, she chose to follow the trail leading to her father instead of pursuing her relationship with Dante. For longtime fans of the games, that reveal was probably not too shocking, but it did set up Jester to be a manipulative cockroach who's ready to expend anyone in order to survive. For some reason, Jester also seemed to know that Lady was coming for him, and unsurprisingly, he was right. Lady set out on a mission to track down her father and seek justice for her mother, Kalina Ann. I guess after learning that John was still alive and secretly operating as a mole, there was no way she was going to let him disappear again. Even if it comes at the cost of her relationship with Dante, she had to take down the man who had haunted her entire life. The big question, though, is how is she actually supposed to reach him now that the rift between Earth and Makai has been sealed? If you ask me, Season 3 will spend a lot of time explaining how John Arkham became the chaotic evil that he is now in the first place. There's also the mystery of how Jester moves so freely between Makai and Earth without relying on portals or demonic artifacts like everyone else seems to. That alone suggests there's far more to his powers than the series has revealed so far. Now that Arius is dead, Jester's next move is even harder to predict. It's obviously easy to believe that Lady will eventually hunt down and kill her father, but it's never that simple, is it? Jester's exactly the kind of character who would twist emotions by using guilt, manipulation, and old memories to get inside Lady's head. However, despite the drama, it seems like Jester's not only vying for power, but also reveling in the chaos that he's been creating. I have a feeling this dude's playing the long game, so he'll keep creating confusions and misunderstandings on all sides until everyone fights each other to the death, leading him to grab the power vacuum left behind. I mean, we all know John Arkham wanted to be powerful, right? How does the Netflix show portray John Arkham, aka Jester? So as a human, John Arkham was a tall, pale man with blonde hair and a fairly ordinary appearance. He typically dressed in simple clothing and usually wore a white collared shirt underneath a light brown cardigan with green accents, thus giving him the classic look of a quiet academic or researcher. But after injecting himself with demon blood, his appearance became far more unsettling as his skin turned ghostly white. His ears sharpened into points and his nose stretched into a long, unnatural shape. His teeth also became jagged and predatory, while most of his hair fell out during the transformation. Around the time that he embraced his new form, John also abandoned his softer appearance in favor of an all-black outfit, which reflected just how far he descended into madness. But as a demonic clown, John's appearance became far more theatrical and intimidating as his body was noticeably more muscular, thus giving him a stronger, more imposing presence than his frail human form ever had. His outfit combined the look of a classic court jester with the style of a harlequin, as he only wore dark colors that made him look absurd and sinister at the same time. As a jester, he wore a black costume along with a fool's cap and had two long extensions, one red and one blue, with each ending in small golden skulls. Around his neck, Jester wore a large purple frilled collar that exaggerated his circus-like appeal. However, his skin was still unnaturally pale, while his long nails, stretched nose, and sharp features made him look more monstrous than ever before. He also carried a staff topped with a glowing green jewel, which completed his bizarre and unsettling look. How is Jester portrayed in the Devil May Cry games? So, in the Devil May Cry gaming lore as well, Arkham is introduced as a scholar and as Lady's father. Almost like his Netflix show counterpart, he appears as a tall, pale, bald man with a cold and unsettling presence. Arkham dresses almost entirely in black, wearing a simple minister-like clothing that lacks any bright colors or decoration, which gives him a very stern and ominous look. But one of his most noticeable features is his heterochromia, which is overshadowed by the disturbing burn scar that covers the entire left side of his head and stretches slightly across his face in several scenes. The scar almost seems alive, twitching and writhing whenever Arkham becomes excited or starts scheming, thus making him appear even more unnatural. Throughout the first half of the story, he's often seen carrying a large tome in his hand, although he's rarely shown actually reading from it. The book feels more like a symbol of his obsession with dark knowledge and demonic power than something he actively studies on screen. But as Jester, Arkham completely abandons his serious appearance in favor of something that is far more bizarre and theatrical. He wears a purple outfit inspired by both traditional jesters and harlequins to attain that perfect dark circus look. In fact, Netflix adapted this entire Jester look from top to bottom, which only goes on to show how strangely iconic and chaotic Jester is. Having said that, Arkham is ultimately driven by an obsessive desire to gain godlike power, and that obsession twists him into a deeply manipulative and dangerous person. Because he's intelligent and highly knowledgeable, Arkham uses his intellect to manipulate those around him by carefully playing people against each other to achieve his goal. But beneath that intelligence is someone completely detached from morality, as he's willing to sacrifice anyone, including his own family, in pursuit of power. His descent into madness is most evident in the way he treats his wife and daughter. Arkham showed no hesitation in killing his wife and later using his daughter as nothing more than a tool in his big plan. To him, personal relationships are meaningless when compared to his ambition. What makes Arkham especially disturbing is how he completely misunderstood the legacy of Sparda. While Sparda sacrificed everything to protect humanity and sealed away the demon world, Arkham focused only on his display of demonic power behind the act. He failed to understand the compassion and humanity that motivated Sparda's choices, and instead idolized him almost like a god by seeing his actions as proof that true power comes from transcending humanity itself. Apart from that, it goes without saying that Arkham is also incredibly opportunistic, as he willingly allies himself with stronger individuals, such as Vergil, whenever it benefits him, and pretends to cooperate until he no longer needs them. Once his allies outlive their usefulness, he has no problem betraying them without a second thought. Even when he was seemingly close to death, Arkham chose to remain manipulative to the very end. In one of his final acts of deception, he managed to convince Lady that Vergil had possessed him, thus attempting to shift the blame for his actions onto someone else. But outside of his Jester persona, Arkham is usually calm, controlled, and calculating, while rarely losing his composure no matter how dangerous the situation becomes. However, after being defeated and weakened by Dante and Vergil, the cracks in his arrogance begin to show. Despite everything that's happened, Arkham still clings to his dream of becoming a god and genuinely believes he did nothing wrong. Even in defeat, he refuses to accept responsibility for the suffering he caused. Instead, he pitifully begs Lady to help him, thus showing a cowardly side behind all his grand ambitions. As Jester, Arkham's personality becomes much more chaotic and theatrical. While he still retains the intelligence and manipulative nature that he has in his normal persona, he's buried beneath an exaggerated, clown-like madness as he constantly mocks, taunts, and insults his opponents, clearly enjoying getting under their skin. In fact, his behavior is so irritating and over the top that even Dante, who is known for his own cocky attitude and non-stop sarcasm, finds Jester especially annoying. Jester's entire lore in the Devil May Cry games. Arkham, aka Jester, is the main villain of Devil May Cry 3 Dante's Awakening. So let's start with these events. Before Devil May Cry 3 Dante's Awakening. If you've played the game, you probably know that very little's actually known about Arkham's life before the events of Devil May Cry 3. Both Lady and Vergil describe him as a scholar who studied the black arts, thus suggesting he spent years researching forbidden knowledge and demonic power. At some point in his life, Arkham married Kalina Ann, and together they had a daughter, Mary, who would later become known as Lady. Despite being her father, Arkham seemingly never had a close relationship with Mary. Lady even stated that her mother was the only family she ever truly had, implying that Arkham was either emotionally distant long before everything fell apart, or that Mary completely rejected him after his crime. As it turns out, during his research into demonic magic, Arkham eventually uncovered the history of the legendary Dark Knight Sparda, and became fascinated by the immense power Sparda possessed. That fascination slowly turned into a dangerous obsession, because now Arkham no longer simply wanted knowledge, he wanted godlike power for himself, as he believed he could rise above humanity and rule the world. In pursuit of that goal, he carried out a ritual involving his wife, Kalina Ann, whose bloodline was apparently connected to the maiden who sacrificed herself alongside Sparda to seal the demon world. Arkham actually sacrificed her in an attempt to gain ultimate demonic power, but the ritual failed disastrously. The result left him horribly scarred, with severe burns that covered the entire left side of his head. However, the ritual also granted him the ability to transform into the demonic clown we know as Jester, thus giving him access to dark, magical power. The tragedy completely shattered his family. After witnessing what her father had done to her mother, Mary disowned Arkham and dedicated her life to hunting him down. From that moment on, she swore she would kill him herself, no matter how long it took, in order to avenge Kalina Ann. Devil May Cry 3 Dante's Awakening. So, even after the ritual failed and left him permanently scarred, Arkham refused to abandon his pursuit of demonic power. According to Lady, he continued killing innocent people in his experiments and schemes, while desperately searching for a way to achieve the godlike strength he craved. Despite the bloodshed, many of these attempts seemingly ended in failure as well, but that made Arkham's obsession only grow stronger. At some point, Arkham uncovered the history of the Demon Negru, which is an ancient tower created by devil worshippers to weaken the barrier between the human world and the demon world. After realizing that the tower could be his key to obtaining Sparda's legendary power, Arkham began setting a much larger plan into motion. Eventually, he crossed paths with Vergil, the elder son of Sparda, in a library. Now, this was a setup, as Arkham already knew about Vergil's demonic heritage and his desire to gain more power, thus making him the perfect person to manipulate. He told Vergil that reviving the Demon Negru was the key to unlocking Sparda's ultimate power, and convinced him to work together towards that goal. On the surface, Arkham seemed to be helping Vergil achieve his ambitions, but in reality, Vergil was only being used as Arkham never intended to share the power of Sparda, and was secretly manipulating every event so that he alone could claim it for himself. We later see Arkham meeting up with Vergil at the lower entrance of the Demon Negru as their plan to resurrect the tower began. While Vergil worked to unseal the power and awaken most of the seven sins demons within it, Arkham took on a different role in the scheme by drawing Dante into the conflict. He eventually shows up before Dante and formally introduces himself after immediately noticing the half of the perfect amulet hanging around Dante's neck. With his usual manipulative attitude, Arkham told Dante that Vergil had essentially invited him to the tower. However, before leaving, he casually flipped Dante's desk over in order to provoke him, and force him into a fight against a group of demons known as the Seven Hells, including Hell Prides, Hell Lusts, Hell Sloths, and a Hell Vanguard. When the Demon King finally erupts from beneath the earth and towers over the city, Arkham stands alongside Vergil at its summit, admiring the tower and the power it represents. During this moment, he confirmed to Vergil how Dante still had the other half of the perfect amulet, which was an important piece they needed in order to unlock Sparda's true power. However, Arkham also knew that his daughter Mary had entered the Demon King, which motivated him to head down into the lower levels of the tower to confront her personally. Along the way, he crossed paths with Dante, who by that point had already defeated Cerberus and began climbing further into the tower. Rather than revealing himself directly, Arkham took on his Jester persona and began interacting with Dante in his usual irritating and theatrical manner. As Jester, he constantly mocked and teased Dante, but at the same time, he also oddly helped guide him through parts of the tower, almost as if he was treating the entire situation like a game for his own amusement. But eventually, Arkham encountered Mary face to face, and during their confrontation, he cruelly tried to provoke her into shooting him and taunted her emotionally, going as far as mocking the fact that he was the one who gave her the name Mary in the first place. Naturally, this ill-fated encounter soon turned violent, leading Arkham to ultimately throw her off the edge of the tower without hesitation. Later on, we see Arkham reunite with Vergil after he defeated his brother Dante in battle and successfully took Dante's half of the perfect amulet. With both halves gathered, Arkham and Vergil together went into the lower sanctums of the Demon King and started the next stage of their plan to obtain Sparda's power. Once they were deep within the lower sanctums of the Demon King, Arkham continued speaking almost reverently about the tower's dark history. He talked about how the Demon King once inspired terror in humanity, and how the evil sealed inside it had originally been locked away by Sparda himself. To Arkham, the tower didn't represent horror, but rather immense power, something he clearly admired and worshipped. However, as he and Vergil made their way alongside the obsidian path, you could clearly see the tension starting to grow between them. Vergil only became suspicious after realizing that Arkham allowed Mary to survive instead of killing her. Although Arkham offered an explanation that sounded reasonable enough, Vergil could tell that he was hiding something, and so he no longer fully trusted Arkham. What comes next is a true surprise, as without warning, Vergil suddenly stabbed Arkham in the back while coldly mocking him for his previous failure to obtain true demonic power. When Vergil called him weak and incomplete, a badly wounded Arkham fired back by pointing out that Vergil was also incomplete, since he was only half demon. Unmoved by the remark, Vergil stabbed him a second time, leaving Arkham mortally wounded on the ground. After believing him to be dead, Vergil abandoned Arkham and continued going deeper into the tower alone. However, despite the severe wounds Vergil inflicted on him, Arkham somehow survived, even if it was barely. While being injured and weak, he dragged himself through the halls of the Demon King, desperately trying to keep moving before eventually collapsing and losing consciousness. Later, both Lady and Dante came across his body at the same time. During this encounter, Lady finally explained to Dante who Arkham really was, while revealing the horrifying truth about her past and her connection to it. But after Dante left, Arkham suddenly regained consciousness and immediately began manipulating Lady once again. Pretending to be a victim, he claimed that Vergil had possessed or controlled him into carrying out his action. He even warned Lady that if Vergil succeeded in opening the path to the demon world, humanity would be thrown into chaos and destruction. While playing on her emotions, he begged her to stop Vergil before seemingly dying from his injury. Initially believing his words, Lady headed off to confront Vergil herself. But after she left, Arkham's body mysteriously disappeared, thus revealing he was still alive and continued to work his tricks from behind the scenes. Later on, Arkham showed up in his Jester form and ran into Dante in the torture chamber, shortly after Dante's battle with Beowulf. While staying true to his usual mocking personality, Jester laughed at the fact that even Dante struggled against the soul-draining effects of the haywire Neo generator. After taunting him, Jester revealed that Vergil had already made his way to the Lair of Judgment and was attempting to use the completed perfect amulet to open the gateway to the demon world. Even though he continued to act playful and annoying, Arkham was still carefully steering events from the shadows by feeding Dante just enough information to keep everything moving according to his own plan. Before leaving, Jester told Dante that the haywire Neo generator was the key to progressing further through the tower, and also explained that although the device drained the user's soul, it also granted the strength that was needed to overcome the obstacles ahead. With that cryptic advice, Jester disappeared once again, leaving Dante to push forward deeper into the Demon King. Much later in the game, after Dante and Vergil exhausted themselves fighting each other once again, with Lady suddenly arriving in the middle of the battle, that is when Arkham finally revealed himself in his Jester persona. He was delighted that all the events had unfolded exactly how he had planned, and so he mockingly congratulated all three of them for unknowingly playing their roles in his scheme. Then, by switching back and forth between his calm human form and his manic Jester persona, Arkham easily overpowered Dante, Vergil, and Lady, all while revealing how he had been manipulating everyone from the very beginning. He explained that while Vergil possessed both the perfect amulet and Sparda's bloodline, he was still missing the final key that was needed to unlock the true power of the Demon King Mundus, which was the blood of the human priestess who helped Sparda seal the tower long ago. In order to prove it, Arkham stabbed Lady in the leg and revealed that she was a descendant of that priestess, meaning her blood was the final component needed to complete the ritual. At that moment, Lady realized that she had been used as part of Arkham's plan all along. Once his intentions were exposed, Dante, Vergil, and Lady briefly put aside their hatred for one another and united against him. But before they could stop him, the tower suddenly activated, causing the Demon King Mundus to shake violently as its inner mechanisms came to life and the structure started shifting around them. Arkham took complete advantage of the chaos by knocking all three of them off the rising platform and left them behind as he ascended upward to the top of the tower. He was now confident that his victory was finally within reach, and also declared how Sparda's power would soon belong to him alone. As the platform rose to the top of the Demon King Mundus, Arkham stood triumphantly at its center, while strange, angelic-looking bells materialized around it. The entire ascent felt almost ceremonial, as if the tower itself was recognizing the completion of his plan. And when he finally reached the summit, the gateway of the demon world opened before him. Arkham was beside himself with enthusiasm, to a point that he began giving a grand speech about how he was on the verge of becoming a god and ruling over the human world after he claimed Sparda's power. Completely consumed by his ambition, Arkham stepped onto the portal and was drawn into the demon world itself. Eventually, he reached the forbidden nirvana, where the object of his obsession had been waiting all along. Yeah, I am indeed talking about the Force Edge, and just like that, he used the fully whole perfect amulet as he awakened the dormant sword and pulled it free from the stone in which it was sealed. The moment Arkham grasped the weapon, immense demonic power surged through his body, and the energy overwhelmed him to a point that it transformed him into a being that looked like Sparda himself, thus finally giving him the godlike power he'd spent his entire life chasing. But that was barely the end of it, because sometime later, Arkham came face to face with Dante inside the demon world. After a brief exchange between the two, Arkham fully unleashed the demonic power he stole from Sparda on him. However, instead of becoming a perfect godlike being, the sheer corruption within his heart twisted the power into something monstrous as his body mutated into a grotesque, shapeless mass, which reflected how unstable and unworthy he truly was. Now, Dante fought Arkham on his own at first, but Arkham's new strength overwhelmed him. The villain was so empowered by Sparda's stolen energy that he nearly killed Dante in the altercation. However, before Arkham could finish him off, Vergil arrived and joined the fight. Despite their rivalry, Dante and Vergil worked together against the greater threat and combined their strength to take Arkham down. In the end, the brothers unleashed a synchronized charge shot with Ebony and Ivory by blasting Arkham and forcing Sparda's power out of his body. With the power stripped away, Arkham was expelled from the demon world entirely. He was then seen falling from the portal high above the Demon King Mundus and crashing back down onto the tower's rooftop after his dream of godhood completely collapsed. Even though he was badly wounded and stripped of the power he fought so hard to obtain, Arkham still refused to let go of his dream of becoming a god. Despite being barely able to move, he desperately crawled across the rooftop of the Demon King Mundus and tried to make his way back toward the portal to the demon world. However, Mary confronted him as she stood over her fallen father and prepared to finally end everything he had done. Even then, Arkham refused to take accountability for his action and instead tried to justify the murder of his wife by comparing it to the sacrifice Sparda made long ago, thus arguing that achieving great power and legendary status always required sacrifices. In his mind, what he did was no different. The clown demon got really desperate and pathetic in his final moments as he begged Mary to help him, but she coldly rejected him and told him that she now went by Lady, as Mary no longer existed because the girl he once knew had died long ago. Followed by this, Lady raised her gun and without hesitation, she shot Arkham while he panicked and begged for her not to shoot. We see her open fire and continue shooting him relentlessly until her gun runs out of bullets, thus finally putting an end to both Arkham and the madness that had consumed him for so many years. Honestly, I really hope this exact storyline in the Netflix show adapts next season, because this game lore was nothing short of iconic. How powerful is Arkham or Jester in the Devil May Cry games? Now, despite his frail and seemingly harmless appearance, you should know that Arkham was surprisingly agile and dangerous in combat. He moved with an unsettling speed and flexibility that often caught his opponents off guard. This was shown clearly when he effortlessly threw Lady off the Demon King Mundus and later managed to overpower Lady, Dante, and Vergil all at once. even while he was cornered with 2 swords pressed against his neck and Lady aiming a rocket launcher directly at him from point-blank range. Arkham stayed completely calm. In a sudden burst of movement, he chose to disable all 3 of them and send them flying with a single sweeping kick, thus proving how he's always allowed everyone to underestimate him in order to gain the upper hand when they won't see it coming. However, as Arkham's far more chaotic and psychotic alter ego, Jester, he gained access to a wide range of bizarre magical ability. One of his most notable powers was the ability to instantly disappear and reappear, which he used frequently to dodge Dante's attacks and later annoy him to the brink, causing Dante to lose patience with Jester's non-stop taunting. Jester also seemingly could ignore gravity altogether by casually crawling across walls and ceilings as if they were normal ground. His movements were unpredictable and unnatural, thus making him feel more like a living nightmare than a normal enemy. Damn, this dude is truly the demonic embodiment of a cockroach. Anyway, in the special edition boss battles of Devil May Cry 3, Jester could summon spheres of electrical energy and launch them in several different attack patterns in order to overwhelm his opponents. He also conjured a giant floating ball with a face resembling the moon, which acted almost like a weapon or a stage prop in his twisted performance. In fact, the moon-like sphere had several attacks of its own, as it could spit out massive bombs, summon giant hands from the floor to grab enemies, create walls of energy to trap opponents to make dodging harder, and even self-destruct. Throughout these attacks, Jester behaved less like a traditional fighter and more like a circus ringmaster, who was putting on a performance by constantly using exaggerated gestures and theatrical movements while controlling the chaos around him. But after obtaining Force Edge and absorbing Sparda's power, Arkham mutated into a massive, grotesque blob-like creature. In this form, he gained immense physical strength, although his fighting style became far more savage and uncontrolled. Instead of relying on strategy, he mostly attacked by wildly lashing out at his enemies with his many oversized limbs, so as to overwhelm them through sheer power and size. He could also launch tendril-like projectiles that could track and chase after their targets, thus making it difficult to avoid his attacks. On top of that, Arkham could now summon creatures known as Legion, who were strange, sluggish beings that somewhat resembled distorted versions of Sparda. These dolphin-like monsters assisted him in the battle by swarming and attacking his opponents, which further showed how unstable and corrupted Arkham had become. After taking in power, he was never truly capable of controlling. Well, that brings us to the end of this video. What are your thoughts about Jester being the next big bad of Netflix's Devil May Cry Season 3? How do you think King Mundus will fit into this narrative? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Stay safe, have a great one, and as always, stay marvelous.